Hello and welcome to another weekly update, and a good chance to kind of go through the three blog posts I put out this week for developers in the Skype for Business, the Office 365, the Microsoft Teams kind of space. And the first of those is about Skype for Business, and it's about Skype for Business 2019. So that's the Skype for Business server, the on-premise edition of Skype for Business. So we know there's a new version that is going to be coming out. We know it's going to be called Skype for Business 2019. That gives us a clue about when we might expect to see it. But we have the public preview is out this week. So that's interesting because we get to look at it as developers. We get to see what developer tools. Skype for Business, especially the server edition, has lots of good tooling for developers to help extend it. And so 2019, the public preview is a good chance for us to look at that and see, see kind of what of those features make sense, as we go into 2019. What's been really useful this time around is that the team, the Skype for Business team, have put together 2 pages which they're maintaining. The first is showing new features which are coming to 2019, and the other page is showing features that are being deprecated, that are being removed from 2019. So that's a really useful place to very quickly go and see what's new and what's disappearing. On the kind of side for what's new, there's not like a huge amount, I think, for developers that's interesting. I think it's worth knowing what those features are because even if you just use Skype for Business, it's useful to know what they are. I don't think there's a lot necessarily that is this kind of sort of really kind of new for developers there. When it comes to to what's being deprecated, it's interesting to look down the list. Again, lots of things won't impact developers and won't impact the code you write. One thing that might is around persistent chat. So persistent chat is officially being deprecated in Skype for Business 2019 in the server edition. Now that obviously impacts on you because the persistent chat service and the server, there is a persistent chat SDK that goes alongside that as well to allow developers to do things with persistent chat and to kind of automate some processes and look at the data and stuff. What's interesting about that is that there is going to be no 2019 persistent chat server. However, it's not like completely clear on this, but it looks as though 2015 will continue to work, and I say that because there's no sort of Microsoft endorsed and blessed documentation around this yet because it's still early days. I've linked in my blog post, I've linked to a blog by Ben Osborne, who's the CTO of MindLink. So MindLink are another unified communications company. They do a lot with persistent chat. They have some really good applications that are built around using persistent chat and exposing out persistent chat to mobile devices and things like that. So they've done a lot more testing than I have, and they are able to provide and bring some clarity to what works and what doesn't. That might be subtly different to what's supported and what is not supported, but if you're interested, go and read my blog post, go and read Ben's blog post as well to get a bit more clarity. The good news though for everyone is that there should be no problems using things like UCMA, UCWA, MSPL solutions. I think it's going to be interesting for client SDK stuff, and I've put some notes in the blog post about that. So the client SDK is going to be interesting because even though there will be a 2019 client and the SDK will most likely work alongside it, although we don't really know yet, the thing that will make it interesting is as users get migrated to Teams, for instance, their Skype for Business client will start to kind of close down. So if you migrate to Teams, but you still keep the Skype for Business client hanging around in order to join Teams meetings, then the client experience that you get in Skype for Business is going to be like a really minimal version. It's not going to be the full kind of Skype for Business client experience. You're just going to be able to use it to join meetings, and everything else you're going to get pushed up to using Teams. In that world, you're then, I think, not going to get the things, the hooks and the events that you might expect to get from the client SDK. So I think if you've got software that uses the client SDK, then now's a really good time to download the public preview, to test that everything still works, but also to test migrating users over to Teams and seeing what the experience is for those users on the Skype for Business client. Do you still get the integration you expect? Do you still get the events, and do you still have the access to the user that you used to in Skype for Business? It's worth doing all that stuff now, because that's all going to be happening. So it allows you as a developer to provide some guidance to your users about how it's going to look. So that was kind of the big thing. A couple of other things which I think are developers worth knowing about. The first is that LinkedIn data, so data from LinkedIn, which Microsoft acquired a few years ago now, that data from LinkedIn is going to start being exposed in Microsoft applications in the profile pic, in the sort of contact card, profile card thing, that when you hover over someone's face or their name and it pops open a little contact card with their contact details, you're going to start seeing some information from LinkedIn there as well. I think that's interesting for a few reasons. The first is really about data security. In order for this to work, you are going to need to log into LinkedIn, and then you are going to need to click allow to some privacy settings. Now, whether or not users really understand what they're clicking allow to, or whether they really bother to read it or not, this means that as you might expect, if you want it displayed, Microsoft are going to have access to your LinkedIn data to be able to take that data from LinkedIn and display it to you on the contact card. The other thing that happens at the same time, though, is that LinkedIn is going to be able to see your Microsoft data, and they will use that to improve the LinkedIn platform. And I imagine lots of kind of system admins are not going to be super happy with that. There is a big kill switch. You can turn this feature off at a tenant level, so we may see admins doing that as a reaction, unless there's a good way of managing that kind of two-way street. But as I understand it, and this is still rolling out to tenants, so I haven't even seen this, I'm just going on the documentation that I've read and have seen and the announcements, because it is still rolling out. If there's not a good way of controlling that two-way street and making it maybe one-way only, so you can just see your LinkedIn data within Microsoft and not your Microsoft data within LinkedIn, I think that might be a sticking point for some people. And that's all written down in my blog. You can look at that. There's some screenshots there as well about what that might look like. And then the other piece of information, information that was kind of interesting that came out this week is around Yammer, and the fact that Yammer is going to get its own tab in Teams. So this has been, I suppose you could look at this in some ways and say, well, duh, like everything else is getting a tab in Teams, why not Yammer? It makes total sense, I guess. Why haven't they done it yet? Well, it's just timing and effort, and all these things take time. It's interesting as well, because I think when I've been talking about this with people, and sometimes the reaction is like, why is this useful to me in a company? Because surely, like, if I'm using Teams, should I still be using Yammer? Does it make sense to bring those two things together like that? Well, I think it does. I think there is a place for Yammer and for Teams and for email, and for Skype for Business, and for all these things, there is a place for this type of communication. In the blog post, I've copied a slide from the Microsoft 365 productivity library, and it gives some guidance around different use cases. And Yammer is very good for that, what they call enterprise social. Your megaphone, like a type of community of practice, or like across a wide part of your organization. Whereas Teams is kind of small. It's chat-based workspace, it's small groups of people doing stuff. So I think there's definitely a place for both of those. It's cool to see the integration happening. It's going to be very useful when it comes, this tab. I'm certainly going to be using it, and it's good to see. It's the evolution of this story that Teams becomes that kind of central point for all your data. Everything sort of comes back to Teams in the end. All right, those are the three kind of blog posts I did this week. 3 things I saw happening that I thought were interesting this week. So have a great weekend. I'm recording this on Sunday, so I've already had my weekend, so I imagine you probably have too by the time you see this. Anyway, have a great week next week, and I will talk to you again next time.